The perfect order. The universe had known peace for 50 million years. Not the fragile peace of treaties and diplomatic agreements, but absolute, unshakable order. This was the gift of the architects, and it was a gift that had never failed. The architects of reality, in the great void between galaxies, where light itself struggled to reach, the architects maintained their eternal watch. They were ancient beyond measure, their civilization predating most of the stars that currently burned in the sky. Their cities existed in folded space, magnificent structures that defied the laws of physics as lesser species understood them. But their greatest achievement was not their technology or their longevity. It was their voice. When an architect spoke with intent, reality listened. It was not telepathy or mind control in any conventional sense. It was deeper, more fundamental. Their commands resonated with the basic fabric of existence itself. Atoms arranged themselves at their direction. Energy flowed according to their will. And every living consciousness in the known galaxy responded to their guidance as naturally as a flower turns toward the sun. The Symphony of Command Overseer. Talmec stood in the observation chamber of the primary nexus, his form shimmering with the soft blue light that characterized his kind. He was young by architect standards, merely 8 million years old, but he had served the Order faithfully throughout his existence. Before him, holographic displays showed hundreds of star systems, each one a testament to architect guidance. In the Andros system, a dispute over mining rights had threatened to escalate into violence. Talmec had simply commanded both parties to negotiate peacefully. They had immediately complied, their anger evaporating as if it had never existed. In the Helix Nebula, a dangerous solar flare threatened a populated world. An architect had commanded the stellar material to disperse harmlessly. It had obeyed without hesitation. This was the natural order. The architects did not rule through force or fear. They simply were, and their presence maintained harmony across thousands of civilizations. The Krillian Empire, with its warrior traditions spanning millennia, laid down arms when architects commanded peace. The Synthoid Collective, machines of pure logic, accepted architect directives as fundamental law. The Whisper Folk, beings of living gas who communicated through quantum entanglement, aligned their consciousness with architect will. Every species, every creature, every particle of matter, all responded to the architect's voice. The new discovery. The alert came during Talmec's meditation cycle, a soft chime that indicated a significant event requiring immediate attention. He opened his awareness to the incoming data stream and felt a ripple of interest. A new spacefaring civilization had been detected. This was not unusual in itself. The galaxy was vast, and species regularly achieved the technological threshold necessary for interstellar travel. What was unusual was the location. The species had emerged from a small spiral arm that architects had long considered too unstable for complex life. The region was young in cosmic terms, full of active star formation and chaotic gravitational dynamics. Yet here they were. Humans, they called themselves. Native to a planet designated Earth in their own language, they had achieved faster-than-light travel through a crude but effective manipulation of space-time. Their ships were inelegant, their technology unsophisticated by galactic standards, but functional enough to carry them to neighboring star systems. Talmec reviewed the preliminary reports with growing curiosity. Humans were carbon-based bipeds, remarkably similar to dozens of other species in basic structure. They had emerged through natural evolution, survived their industrial age without destroying themselves, and now reached outward with the characteristic enthusiasm of young spacefaring races. Nothing in their profile suggested anything extraordinary. Standard integration protocol was clear. Talmec would make contact, issue the foundational commands that would align human civilization with galactic order, and welcome them to the community of sentient species. The process typically took less than a day. Within a week, the new species would be functioning members of galactic society, guided by architect wisdom like all others. First contact. Talmec's vessel emerged from folded space at the edge of human-controlled territory. The ship was a masterwork of architect engineering, more energy than matter, capable of crossing galactic distances in moments. It appeared near a human outpost on the fourth planet of their home system, a red world they called Mars. Human detection systems immediately registered his presence. Their primitive sensors couldn't fully comprehend what they were seeing. but they knew something had arrived. Talmec watched with benign amusement as their military vessels scrambled, weapons charging, defensive formations taking shape. Such reactions were common among species encountering architects for the first time. It would be resolved in moments. He opened a communication channel using their own electromagnetic frequencies. His voice, translated through universal linguistic matrices, reached every human ship and station in the system simultaneously. "People of Earth," Talmec began, his words carrying the weight of absolute authority that characterized all architect speech. "You have achieved interstellar capability and are hereby welcome to the galactic community. I am Overseer Talmec of the Architects. You will cease all military preparations and prepare for peaceful integration." The command was gentle by architect standards, barely more than a suggestion. Any other species would have immediately complied, their weapons powering down, their crews filled with calm acceptance. Talmec waited for the inevitable response. The impossible nothing happened. Talmec's perception sharpened, focusing on the human vessels. Their weapons remained charged, their formations held. Inside the ships, crew members continued their defensive protocols. Some were arguing about how to respond. Others were running scans of his vessel. A few were actually suggesting they open fire. This was incorrect. This was impossible. Talmec tried again, increasing the resonance of his command. "You will stand down your weapons and open communication channels for integration instructions." On the bridge of the lead human vessel, a woman in a military uniform turned to her tactical officer.
"Did anyone else hear something weird just then?"
"Like a voice, but not quite." "Negative, Commander," the officer replied. "All channels are clear except for that initial broadcast." "Should we respond?" The woman tapped her fingers on her command chair. "Hail them on standard frequencies. Let's see what they want before we do anything hasty." Talmec felt something he had not experienced in millions of years. Confusion. The humans had heard his words on the basic communication channel, but they had not felt his command. The directive that should have resonated through their consciousness, that should have compelled immediate compliance, had simply failed. He tried a different approach, focusing his will on the physical components of their weapon systems. "Your weapons will deactivate." This was a more direct command, one that acted on matter rather than consciousness. Machines obeyed architects even more readily than organic minds. The weapons remained active. One human technician noticed a brief fluctuation in power systems. "That's odd. We had a 0.2% drop in weapons grid efficiency for about half a second." Running diagnostics. Growing alarm for the next 3 hours, Talmec attempted every form of command in the architect repertoire. He tried directing their engines to shut down. He tried compelling their communication systems to transmit integration data. He tried the most subtle consciousness adjustments, the kind that would merely suggest peaceful intentions rather than forcing compliance. Nothing worked. The humans responded to him eventually, their commander Torres speaking with a mixture of caution and curiosity. They asked questions about his civilization, about galactic society, about trade possibilities and cultural exchange. They were polite, even friendly, but they were not obeying. Worse still, they seemed completely unaware that anything unusual was happening. To them, this was simply a first contact scenario playing out normally. They had no idea they were defying a power that had commanded reality itself for 50 million years. Talmec withdrew from the human system and immediately opened emergency channels to the Architect High Council. His report was concise but unprecedented. He had encountered a species that could not be commanded. The Emergency Council. The High Council chamber materialized in the space between dimensions, a place where the greatest architects gathered in times of significance. 12 of the most ancient beings in existence focused their attention on Talmec's report. Some had witnessed the birth of galaxies. Others had guided the evolution of entire stellar clusters. All of them had lived through countless millennia of perfect order. None of them had ever heard of a species immune to architect commands. High Architect Velan, eldest of the council, spoke first. His consciousness was vast, spanning multiple dimensions. "You are certain of your observations, Overseer Talmec?" "Absolutely certain, High One," Talmec replied. "I employed every standard command protocol and several experimental variations." The humans showed no response beyond their natural sensory perception of my transmitted words. They heard me as they would hear any other voice. Nothing more. Architect Centaura, who specialized in biological systems, projected a holographic model of human neural structure. I have reviewed all available data on human biology. Their brains are conventional in structure, carbon-based neural networks with electrochemical signaling. There is nothing in their physical makeup that should grant immunity to our influence. Yet the immunity exists, Valon observed. This suggests the resistance is not biological, but something more fundamental to their consciousness itself. Architect Morath, the Council's expert on consciousness studies, pulsed with analytical light. In 50 million years, we have encountered 17,412 sentient species. Every single one responds to our commands. The ability is universal, transcending biology, technology, or evolutionary origin. If humans are truly immune, it means their consciousness operates on principles we have never before encountered. The council chamber fell silent for several long moments. Each architect grappled with the implications. Their entire civilization was built on the foundation of their commanding ability. It defined their role in the galaxy, their purpose, their very identity. The idea that a species could exist outside that framework was not just surprising, it was philosophically unsettling. We must understand this anomaly, Valon finally declared. Assemble a research team. Study the humans thoroughly. Determine the source of their immunity and whether it can be overcome. Until we understand them, they represent an unknown variable in the order we have maintained for eons. The research begins. Within days, a team of 50 architects descended upon human space. They did not announce themselves or seek permission. For millions of years, they had studied species without interference, and they saw no reason to change that approach now. They observed from folded space, their sensors penetrating every aspect of human civilization. What they found was both ordinary and extraordinary. Humans were violent by galactic standards. Their history was filled with wars, conflicts, and struggles for power. Yet they were also creative, building art and music and literature that showed remarkable emotional depth. They were individualistic, each human seemingly determined to forge their own path. Yet they formed deep social bonds and cooperated on massive scales. They were logical and emotional, scientific and spiritual, pragmatic and idealistic, often all at once. Most puzzling was their consciousness itself. Human minds were chaotic in a way architect researchers had never encountered. Thoughts branched in unpredictable directions. Decisions were made through processes that defied pure logic. Humans held contradictory beliefs, changed their opinions, argued with themselves internally. Their neural patterns showed constant dynamic flux, never settling into the stable configurations seen in other species. Architect Thane, leading the research team, compiled his findings with growing fascination. Their consciousness is not merely resistant to our commands. It is fundamentally incompatible with external direction. Human minds developed in complete isolation from architect influence. For millions of years, every other spacefaring species has been subtly guided by our presence during crucial developmental stages. Humans evolved entirely on their own. The implications crystallized in Thane's understanding. Every species in the galaxy had developed consciousness, while already immersed in the subtle field of architect influence. That influence had shaped the very nature of how those species thought, creating neural patterns that naturally resonated with architect commands. It was not control exactly. It was more like singing in harmony with a note that had always been present in the background. Humans had never heard that note. Their consciousness had developed in complete silence, following its own unique evolutionary path. The result was a form of awareness that simply didn't have the receptors, the resonance patterns, the fundamental compatibility to respond to architect directives. The report's conclusion: Thane stood before the High Council 6 months after beginning his research. His report was comprehensive, detailing every aspect of human consciousness they had studied. The conclusion was inescapable. Humans cannot be commanded, Thane stated plainly, not because they are stronger than us or because they possess some special defense. They cannot be commanded because their consciousness literally does not perceive our directives as commands. To them, our voice is just a voice. Our will is just a suggestion. They have true absolute free will in a way that no other species in galactic history has possessed. High Architect Valon processed this information with the weight of 50 million years of experience. Then we face a choice. We can attempt to force compliance through other means, or we can accept that we have encountered something genuinely new. If we force compliance, Architect Centaura interjected, we become conquerors rather than guides. That is not what we are. But if we allow them to exist outside our order, Morath countered, we introduce chaos into a galaxy that has known perfect peace for eons. What happens when other species learn that the Architect's voice can be ignored? What happens to the harmony we have maintained? The debate continued, but Talmec, listening from his position as the first architect to encounter humans, felt something unexpected stirring in his ancient consciousness. It was not fear or anger, it was curiosity, perhaps even excitement. For 50 million years the architects had commanded the galaxy. Every species had been a subject, however benevolently treated. But humans could never be subjects. They could only be something the architects had never had before. They could only be equals. The unbreakable species. The debate in the High Council chamber had continued for 3 weeks without resolution. For beings who typically reached consensus in hours, this was unprecedented. The question of what to do about humanity had divided the architects in ways that millions of years of unity had never produced. The Great Division High, Architect Valon observed the growing schism with concern that bordered on alarm. On one side stood Architect Morath and his faction, arguing for containment. Their position was logical and rooted in 50 million years of successful galactic management. Humanity represented an uncontrollable variable. If left unchecked, their immunity to architect influence could inspire rebellion among other species. The carefully maintained order could collapse into chaos. We have maintained galactic peace for longer than most stars have existed, Morath argued, his form pulsing with conviction. That peace depends on our ability to guide species away from destructive paths. Humans cannot be guided. Therefore, they must be restricted to their home system until we find a solution. We must establish a quarantine barrier that prevents their expansion. On the other side stood Architect Centaura and those who saw opportunity rather than threat. Humanity is not a disease to be quarantined, Centaura countered, her consciousness radiating patient determination. They are proof that consciousness can exist in forms we never imagined. For 50 million years we have been shepherds. Perhaps it is time we learned to be something else. Talmec found himself drawn to Centaura's perspective, though he understood Morath's concerns. He had been the first to encounter humans, the first to experience the shock of his commands falling on deaf ears. But in the months since, as he continued observing humanity, he had witnessed something remarkable. The human paradox. I vote for acceptance, Valon announced. Not because I believe humans are superior to other species, but because they prove that our way is not the only way. For 50 million years we have commanded the galaxy. Perhaps it is time we learned what partnership truly means. The new paradigm. The decision sent shockwaves through architect civilization. Morath and his faction accepted the ruling, but their concern remained. If we cannot command humans, how do we prevent them from becoming a threat? How do we maintain galactic peace? Centaura provided the answer that would reshape everything. We talk to them. We negotiate. We collaborate. We do what we should perhaps have been doing all along. We treat them as partners rather than subjects. It was revolutionary and terrifying. The architects had not engaged in true negotiation in millions of years. Why would they when they could simply command cooperation? But now they had no choice. Talmec volunteered to lead the first true diplomatic mission. He returned to human space, this time without any pretense of commanding authority. He met again with Commander Torres, and this time he spoke to her as an equal. We have much to learn from each other, Talmec told her honestly. My people have maintained galactic order for 50 million years. But your people have something we have never encountered, absolute freedom. We wish to understand that freedom, and in exchange, we offer you the knowledge and resources of galactic civilization. Torres listened carefully, her sharp human mind processing implications that Talmec could not command her to accept. You're saying your people have been controlling every other species in the galaxy? And we're the first ones you can't control? Yes. And now you want to work with us as equals? Yes. Torres smiled, and it was a very human expression. Part amusement, part suspicion, part genuine warmth. Well, that's going to be interesting. We're not exactly the most organized species. We argue about everything. change our minds constantly, and half the time we can't even agree on basic facts. We have observed this, Talmec admitted. It is inefficient, maybe, Torres agreed. But it's also how we figure things out. We throw ideas at each other, test them through conflict, and eventually stumble onto solutions that work. It's messy, but it's honest. Talmec felt something shift in his understanding. Honesty. That was what had been missing from architect civilization for eons. When you could command perfect harmony, there was no need for honest disagreement. But perhaps there was value in that disagreement, in the chaos and conflict that humans navigated daily. The ripple effect news of the architect-human partnership spread quickly through galactic civilization. Other species watched with fascination as the ancient architects, who had guided reality itself for longer than memory, sat down to negotiate with young humans who had barely left their home system. The negotiations were difficult. Humans asked uncomfortable questions, challenged architect assumptions, and refused to simply accept established galactic norms. They wanted to know why things were done certain ways, what alternatives existed, whether the current system truly served everyone equally. They were exhausting to work with. They were also transformative. Architect Morven, initially skeptical of the partnership, found himself in a debate with a human philosopher named Dr. Amara Chen about the nature of consciousness and free will. She challenged assumptions he had held for 2 million years. She made arguments that defied his logical frameworks. She was, by architect standards, completely irrational. She was also right about several fundamental points he had never questioned. "Your order is beautiful," Dr. Chen told him during one particularly intense discussion. "But it's also a prison. Every species you've guided has lost something essential. The right to fail, to struggle, to find their own path. Maybe that path is harder and more dangerous, but it's theirs. That matters." Morven found himself considering perspectives that 50 million years of architect consensus had never contemplated. Perhaps command and control, even benevolent control, was not the highest form of civilization. Perhaps there was value in chaos and struggle, in the messy, unpredictable process of genuine growth. The transformation begins. 6 months after the partnership began, the first non-human species requested a reduction in architect guidance. The Krillian Empire, inspired by human independence, wanted to try managing their own affairs. It was a tentative request filled with uncertainty, but it was genuine. The architects, following their new paradigm, agreed. The results were mixed. The Krillians made mistakes, suffered setbacks, experienced conflicts they had not known in millions of years. But they also showed sparks of creativity and innovation that had long been dormant. They were learning to be truly independent again. Other species began making similar requests. Not all at once and not without fear, but gradually. The galaxy was waking up from a 50-million-year dream of perfect order into a reality that was chaotic, uncertain, and vibrantly alive. Talmec watched these changes with feelings he had never experienced before. Pride at seeing species rediscover their independence, anxiety about the unpredictability of the new order, hope that something better might emerge from the chaos, and underneath it all, gratitude toward humanity for forcing this transformation. The human contribution as human technology advanced through partnership with galactic civilization. Their unique perspective began influencing architect thinking in unexpected ways. Human scientists approached problems with intuitive leaps that architect logic had never allowed. Human artists created works that moved ancient consciousnesses in ways millions of years of architect art never had. Human philosophers asked questions that challenged the very foundations of architect identity. Most significantly, humans taught the architects something they had forgotten over eons of absolute power. They taught them humility. Dr. Sarah Okafor, a human diplomat who had become one of the primary liaisons with architect civilization, put it simply during a major conference. "You've spent 50 million years believing you had all the answers. But the truth is nobody has all the answers. Not you, not us, not anyone. The best we can do is stumble forward together, learning from each other's mistakes and celebrating each other's successes." High Architect Valon, listening to her words, felt something profound shift in his ancient consciousness. She was right. The architects had not been maintaining perfect order. They had been preventing growth. Real growth required risk, uncertainty, and yes, even chaos. The new era 2 years after first contact, the Galactic Council convened with human representatives present as full members. It was the first council session in 50 million years where architect commands did not guide the proceedings. Debates were loud, disagreements were common, and consensus was difficult to achieve. It was also the most productive session in living memory. Species that had followed architect guidance without question for eons suddenly had opinions, ideas, and innovations to share. The galaxy was becoming less orderly but more creative, less predictable but more alive. The transformation was painful for some, exhilarating for others, but undeniably real. Talmec stood in the observation chamber where his journey had begun, looking out at a galaxy that was fundamentally different from the one he had known for 8 million years. Humans had done this, not through superior power or advanced technology, but simply by existing as they were, chaotic, independent, and completely immune to control. Commander Torres joined him in the chamber, now a permanent human ambassador to the architects. She had become a friend, something Talmec had not realized architects could have until humans taught them how. "Do you regret it?" she asked him. "Giving up the perfect order you maintained for so long?" Talmec considered the question carefully. The galaxy was more chaotic now, more dangerous in some ways, but it was also more genuine. Species were finding their own paths, making their own mistakes, achieving their own triumphs. The architects were no longer shepherds commanding their flock. They were partners in a grand, unpredictable experiment. "No," he answered finally. "For 50 million years we maintained peace. But we also maintained stagnation. You showed us that there are things more important than order. Freedom, growth, the right to choose even if that choice leads to failure. These are not things that can be commanded. They must be earned." Torres smiled, that uniquely human smile full of warmth and understanding. "Welcome to chaos, Talmec. It's terrifying and beautiful and worth every moment of uncertainty." As they watched the galaxy together, both of them knew that the real journey was just beginning. The architects had learned to stop commanding. Now they needed to learn to listen, to collaborate, to be truly equal partners in a cosmic community that would shape itself. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had freed it. And in doing so, they had shown that the greatest power was not the ability to command others, but the strength to stand independent and the wisdom to walk alongside those who chose to journey with you. The universe would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.